All right, I am seated with Dr. Kirk Adams, and I'm very excited to interview him today. Kirk and I met back when he was the CEO for Lighthouse for the Blind here in Seattle, and he has since jumped around a little bit and has now developed Innovative Impact LLC. So thanks for being with me, Kirk.
Great to be here. It's been wonderful being back in the Pacific Northwest, and you're one of the first people I reached out to say I'm back and I'm ready to get to work here again in the Seattle area.
And along those lines, you have a sweet spot, which I believe is privately held businesses.
Yes.
Do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, sure. So my career has primarily been in leadership roles in the nonprofit sector. So CEO of the Lighthouse for the Blind here in Seattle, CEO of the American Foundation for the Blind, which was Helen Keller's organization based in New York and then DC. But those beautiful nonprofit structures, I love them, but they are governed by boards of volunteers. There are committees and processes and quarterly meetings, and it's challenging to be nimble in those types of environments. They offer lots of other advantages, but when I decided to make a change and step out of those structures and create my business, an LLC, about a year ago, I have just found that working with privately held companies is just a joy because there can be decisions made quickly. There can be agreement formations that happen quickly. There can be ecosystem mergers that happen quickly. And gosh, over the last 12 and a half months, things have just accelerated so rapidly. Yeah. And so I found myself enjoying the space and enjoying the entrepreneurial spirit in that privately held space and the innovation, the willingness to experiment and innovate. So it's been really fun.
Well, and I'm particularly excited to bring your message to kind of the Pacific Northwest privately held business ecosystem, if you will. And I want to jump right in with what is the employment landscape for persons with disabilities?
It's bad. First off, so blindness is considered a significant disability. So of us with significant disabilities, including people who are blind, 35% of working age blind people are working, so are in the workforce. That compares to about 70% of the general population of working age are in the workforce. So that's half the workforce participation rate. And then if you look at formal unemployment rates from Bureau of Labor Statistics, if the unemployment rate for the general population, people actively seeking work who are not working, you say it's 4%. Of those people with disabilities who are actively seeking work, it'll be 8%. So the results are always either twice as bad or half as good, however you slice it. And then if you dig deeper into that, of the 35% of us that are employed, third, I'm a researcher in American Foundation for the Blind as a research organization. So these are research-based numbers. A third of the people would say they're underemployed compared to about 22% of the general population. And then we are in a much narrower band of occupations. We are confined to the lower rungs of the org chart. So upward mobility is much less. As far as entrepreneurship goes, of the 35% of us who are working, only 6% are self-employed. The vast majority work for government or nonprofits, and which caps salaries and wealth accumulation. And 12% of the general population are self-employed. So there's a big entrepreneurship gap as well. So most people are living with a Social Security disability income check, which is a poverty level subsistence. So about a third of us who are blind working age live in poverty. Our home ownership is 1/10 that of the general population. So it's not good, and it hasn't gotten much better for a long, long time. And I'm passionate about leaving a legacy of changing that before I leave leave this sphere of existence and move to whatever's next. I want that to change.
You've got work to do then.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. What are examples of businesses who have chosen to adopt and intentionally include people with disabilities?
Yeah. So one great example is the Warehouse and Distribution Center, Walgreens in Anderson, South Carolina, which I visited in September with one of my clients, United Safety Technology. I took their team there. So a gentleman named Randy Lewis was Chief Supply Officer of Walgreens. He's retired now, but he has an autistic son. And he was tasked to build a new distribution center from ground up in 2007 in South Carolina. He did what you do and got buy-in from his top leadership to design it intentionally to include people with developmental disabilities. He created a ecosystem merger, a partnership with the state of South Carolina Vocational Rehabilitation System, and they have achieved and maintained 40% of their 550 employees are people with disabilities. A small university, Anderson University, has tracked the data from the beginning. So of the 20 distribution centers in the Walgreens system, it's their most productive, lowest turnover, lowest absenteeism, best safety record, because everybody follows the safety procedures and protocols, and the best employee satisfaction. And sitting down with their management, they just talk about the culture and how they've been in the warehousing distribution business for 30 years, 35 years, 40 years, and they've never worked in a place where they had such a sense of camaraderie, of team, of people actively supporting one another, of dignity and respect, and they can't wait to get out of bed and go to work in the morning. So that's one. On kind of the other end of the spectrum, Cisco has a internal and a high-level help desk in California, and I heard a presentation several years ago by a gentleman who was brought in to improve the efficiency and productivity of that department. He had a blind roommate in college, so he knew that blind people are just as capable as anyone else given the proper tools and techniques. So he contacted the California Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, said he needed to hire some people, please send him some applicants. So he hired 1, then 2, then 5, then 10, then 20 people who are blind into his department. So there was a significant percentage, and their outcomes skyrocketed. They met and exceeded every one of their key performance indicators. And so we do have some examples that we can build upon.
Yeah. There was another company that you mentioned that you were working with, Nova Coast.
Yes. So this is a beautiful example. So Nova Coast is a cybersecurity company, privately held, 3 founders, founded 27 years ago. They're based in Santa Barbara, California. And then for strategic business and tax reasons, they moved their headquarters to Wichita, Kansas. So that's an interesting. If you've been to Santa Barbara and you've been to Wichita, that's an interesting decision. But they have about 400 employees. Their plan is to scale it to about 1,000 or so, say over the next 3 to 5 years, and then find a buyer for their company and exit and live lives and have their families for generations forward set up. But they found a constraint in that they could not find enough entry-level cybersecurity people to hire, to expand, to open additional security operations centers, and that is endemic in the cybersecurity industry. If you go to a job site like Indeed and you put in cybersecurity, you're gonna see 30,000 open jobs every day. Wow. So in Wichita, they connected with a blindness organization called Envision, which I've worked with a lot in the past. They're a sister agency to the Lighthouse for the Blind here in Seattle, in that they employ blind people in businesses. And through conversation, they came upon a strategy: let's train and hire blind people to do cybersecurity. So they created a 10-week virtual program, 200 hours of training that blind people can take using the specialized technology we use, screen reading software, and then sit for the entry-level cyber certifications, Security Plus and Network Plus, and then go to work. So they set it up. They set it up with the state of Kansas federally funded vocational rehabilitation agency, and they got no students. No students signed up. So they're quite disappointed. As the way it goes, as the way things look, one of the co-founders of Nova Coast was on vacation in the Seychelles. A good friend, colleague, blind, successful entrepreneur and philanthropist, Dan Berlin, and his wife were in the Seychelles. His wife went on a dive trip, met the co-founder of Nova Coast. They were chatting afterwards. Came up that lady said, "My husband is blind," and the other woman said, "We're trying to hire blind people and we can't figure out how to do it. We're so excited, it's not working." So they brought Dan over, and Dan said, "You should call Dr. Kirk Adams about that." So I had just left the American Foundation for the Blind, so we were connected. The president of Nova Coast lives in Normandy Park, just south of Seattle, coincidentally. So Paul Anderson, I went and talked to him for an hour, and this is the beauty of the privately held company. He said, "Let's do it." So I did a couple things. I contacted the Washington State Department of Services for the Blind. The director used to work with me at the Lighthouse. Told him about the program. He got excited. They set aside funding for the first 15 students to go through. Students are starting through the pipeline. Our first students are sitting for their tests. I've got it set up in Washington, Kansas, Indiana, Alabama, Florida, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Texas is coming up. Working on Michigan, Ohio, Illinois. So my back of the envelope calculations are that when we're fully up and running, and in the 80-20 rule, the most populous states, I think I can get 400 blind people a year into cybersecurity careers, year after year after year. So that's a systems change. That's a transformation. If I do that for 10 years, wow, then I have 4,000, 5,000 blind people in cyber, and that's going to change the cultures and landscapes of lots of companies. So on the demand side, Nova Coast runs 2 cybersecurity conferences a year. They're called Innovate. They pay the way and fly in 120 Chief Information Security Officers, which I now know are called CISOs. So they fly in 120 CISOs. They have 45, 50 vendors in cyber in the space, 3-4 days, a structured way for everyone to meet everyone. Right after I met them, they invited me to their Innovate conference in Phoenix last November. I went again in Nashville in March. I've talked to 100 or so CISOs from Kaiser Permanente, Pentagon Federal Credit Union, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Spirit Aerospace, just a wide variety of major employers.
Yeah.
And I've got a list of 75 CISOs who say, "We will eagerly interview any blind person who goes through your program and gets those 2 Network Plus and Security Plus certifications." So it's connecting those dots. And then the third piece is the government. We have a federally funded system that is underutilized, the vocational rehabilitation system. Every state has at least one. Some have 2. Mm-hmm. One for people who are blind, one for other people with other disabilities. But they can pay for this training, which they do. They can pay for the specialized equipment that is needed for the first job. They can pay the salaries for a on-the-job training period, so the employer can receive those benefits. There are work opportunity tax credits available. So there are lots of tools and techniques and resources available to the employer community. And the beautiful part is aligning all of these stakeholder groups who have a common goal. Let's get people with disabilities employed. Let's enrich our workforce. And they typically aren't talking to each other very well. So you've got government-funded vocational rehabilitation. You've got the corporate employer who's saying, I can't find enough good people to hire. You've got nonprofits in the communities who have philanthropic dollars to support disabled employment. Then, of course, you've got the communities of people with disabilities. So it's not rocket science. I just bring all those stakeholder groups together around a table and say, let's figure out what each of us needs to do to make these things happen.
Yeah. You answered one of the questions that I was going to ask, which is who are the stakeholders?
Yeah.
And you just listed them for me.
Yeah, so there's a book called Forces for Good. It's not
Okay.
the most, it's not a page turner. It's research-based, but they took a look at 12 initiatives that have really, truly been transformational. Habitat for Humanity is an example. And their conclusions are just what I said, that to make anything really big happen, you have to involve government, corporate, nonprofit, and community and get them all aligned.
Yeah. So with that said, and I think you had given me a statistic that less than 10% of companies who have committed to disability inclusion have actually connected with resources to do so.
Yes, specifically with vocational rehabilitation. Again, funded every state through the Department of Education, our taxpayer dollars.
Yeah.
And research shows that of the companies that have formally have some sort of formal disability inclusion statement, that 9.2% are actually connected with the resources of vocational rehabilitation.
So my next question then is, how does a company do that? What's the playbook for getting connected?
Yeah. Well, geographically, like I say, there's 30 states that have 2 voc rehab agencies, one for people who are blind, one for people with other disabilities. 20 states have 1. Well, first of all, if you want to figure it out, you could get in touch with me. It's kirkadams000@gmail.com or on LinkedIn. But it's 1 or 2 phone calls to the vocational rehabilitation agency or agencies. And once they get up off the floor, because an employer actually called them and said, we want to hire people with disabilities, every agency has a function, which is a liaison with the employer community. So they will assign the company someone, and that person should come out and take a tour and understand your operational needs. You should have some thoughts around 2 or 3 entry-level positions that you typically have some challenges either filling or keeping filled, so that you have that information at hand. So that'd be step 1. And another really interesting research study, they asked the vocation rehabilitation counselors who work for these state agencies, and then they asked HR hiring and recruiting folks, what is the greatest barrier to successful employment of people with disabilities? So they asked the same question to these 2 different groups. The vocational rehabilitation counselor said employer attitudes, and the employer said lack of understanding of our operational needs. So it's important that the VR folks get into the businesses to really understand what the businesses need. A big example, I had that conversation at Starbucks five or 6 years ago. They have a structure around hiring people with disabilities, and my question was, give me your top 2 or 3 entry-level positions you can't keep filled. And they were very, very at their fingertips. Accountant 1, you don't need to be a CPA. HR specialists who do resume screening and initial phone interviews for all their stores, and internal help desk for all their store managers. And they said, we can't keep these jobs filled. And so that gave me something to work with. Let's build some programs around creating some pathways for people into these entry level positions. The next step would be to contact the nonprofit agencies in your community that have a mission around disability employment. Not quite as easy perhaps to find as the voc rehab agencies, but there are Vision Serve Alliance is a network of nonprofits serving people who are blind in particular. So you could start by going to the Vision Serve Alliance website and looking at their member list and finding out who's in your community. And then, workforce development boards sometimes have a disability-focused group. So it's just reaching out to 3 or 4 stakeholders who share that common mission of disability employment and inviting them in and telling them what you need. Mm-hmm. And they will be so happy that someone has raised their hand and said, we're very interested in exploring employing people with disabilities in our organization.
Yeah. I would like to kind of zero in on, why do more companies not take advantage of this? And if you could give some of the examples that you've told me offline of the positive impacts for the businesses who have leaned into disability inclusion.
Yeah. I think it's just a lack of awareness and education. I love you, vocational rehabilitation, but you're not a marketing organization. You're there. You have resources. You have tools and techniques, but you are a government agency, and you don't necessarily aggressively market yourself. So there is a lack of awareness, I think, is the main thing. And then a lack of exposure. There are lots of people who have gone through their whole working lives and not worked with anyone with a visible disability. I'll guarantee you everyone who's worked in a company of more than 10 people has worked with someone with a disability. Mm-hmm. It may be an invisible disability, of which there are many. But that lack of exposure, I think, is another key. So again, for those companies who are sincerely interested, going to visit another company who's doing it. Here, Microsoft is just a shining example. There's across the lake, I guess I'm on the east side. Across the lake from where I live in Redmond, there are probably 300 or more blind people on that Redmond campus working, not in blindness specific roles, but just as program managers and coders and marketing people and HR people, et cetera. And many hundreds of people with autism. So they're the shining star really in the corporate world in America. The other conversation I have is with employers about what type of people are you trying to hire? What are the characteristics of the people you want in your workforce? And a book like The Talent Code would explain how living with a disability, the lived experience of disability, gives people unique opportunities to develop a unique set of strengths that are extraordinary and not common. So extraordinary levels of strengths in areas like resilience and grit and perseverance and creative problem solving and how to analyze and manage risk and how to work in teams, how to communicate with a wide variety of people, level 5 listening, emotional intelligence, all those things you need to develop in order to thrive as a person with a disability in a world that was not constructed to accommodate us. So that's a really interesting conversation, and sometimes the light bulb goes off when you're talking and you say these are the people you're trying to hire, and I can show you there's hundreds of thousands of people who would eagerly come and work at your organization and would bring those strengths and would be loyal, enthusiastic, creative, innovative, contributing parts of your organization.
That's great. Would you take just a couple of minutes, and if I may, would you tell us your personal story?
You do not have enough time for my personal story. I'll give you. But I was born sighted. My retinas detached when I was in kindergarten. So I was a sighted child for 5 years, and then within a couple days, a blind child. And I was a kindergarten student, and I had a couple of retinal surgeries that were unsuccessful. And then when it was time to go back to first grade, we lived in Linwood. the local school said, no, he can't come back here. He needs to go to the state school for blind kids. And my parents had never met a blind person before. I woke up as their blind kid, and they went to visit the Washington State School for the Blind in Vancouver, Washington. I was born when they were in college, so these are young people, 25, 26 years old,
Right.
who have this situation in their family that they certainly, in their wildest dreams, hadn't anticipated. So they were appalled by what they saw there as far as the academic activity. And I was referred to a retinal surgeon at the University of Oregon Medical School in Portland, so we were going down there a lot. And someone there said, well, the Oregon State School in Salem is awesome. So we went and visited. I remember visiting as a 6-year-old, and they agreed it was awesome. So they quit their jobs. My dad was teaching at Edmonds High, JV basketball coach. He retired as the head basketball coach at Snohomish High, where I graduated. But anyway, they quit their jobs, moved the family down there. I had a younger brother. Sister came later, and they settled in a town in Silverton, Oregon, about 15 miles from Salem.
Yeah.
So that I could be a day student and I wouldn't need to live in a dorm as a 6-year-old. Which, thank you. And so I went there first, second, and third grade and learned blindness skills, reading and writing Braille, traveling safely and confidently with a white cane, which I have here, and typing on a typewriter at that time, so that I could start public school in 4th grade, which I did, and then sink or swim in public school. But I was equipped to survive. But two things happened at the School for the Blind, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, that are strong predictors of success in employment as a blind adult. And one was learning blindness skills. So the stronger your blindness skills are, the more likely you are to succeed.
And when you say blindness skills, sorry.
Braille,
Okay.
cane travel, that would be called keyboarding. Now, assistive technology would be now. Then it was typing.
Yeah.
But so I didn't have a choice. I was totally blind. There was no question, can he read large print? Can we use magnifiers? Can he just listen to tapes? So that's a dilemma for a lot of families, because most people who are blind aren't totally blind. Mm-hmm. Most have, 90% have some level of usable vision. So there's always there's often a gray area of what's the best techniques to teach the child. And then the other thing was another strong predictor, and I did my dissertation, my PhDs in leadership and change, and I interviewed blind adults who are successfully employed in large corporations, and the common theme was they all have a super strong sense of an internal locus of control, which means they feel in their bones that they can create their own path, forge their way, create their own future, as opposed to a strong sense of external locus of control, which means people that feel in their bones, things happen to me. The world acts on me. Mm-hmm. There's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah. As
a contrast. So I got the blindness skills. I also got that strong internal locus of control, because, man, it was the 60s, and these were some well-educated hippies, and they took us backpacking and building bonfires, and I remember cutting wood out in the Three Sisters Wilderness area at a cabin with a 2-person crosscut saw. I can remember, the sound of the saw zipping through the wood, the smell of the wood. We built igloos up on Mount Hood. I can remember being in the tide pools on the Oregon coast, holding limpets and nudibranchs in my hand. And
wow.
We climbed trees and scraped knees and got hurt and did things that 6, 7, 8-year-olds do. Fought in the sandbox. Yeah. So we did what kids do, and a lot of blind children don't have that experience. The third success factor I got was high expectations and high expectations from family and school is a strong predictor. A lot of kids with disabilities, again, born into families with no experience or a school district with no experience, suffer low expectations. People don't expect much, and then sometimes that becomes internalized, unfortunately. So and then my parents were teachers, and they didn't like to see anything other than an A on the report card. My dad was a basketball coach. He expected his children to be involved in athletics, so I wrestled and ran cross country and did those things as a high school letterman. So I had three things that are super important happen. So feel very fortunate in that respect.
You mentioned the internal locus of control. Is there an age at which that develops?
So usually before the end of the teens. So one person who had a long career at a major telecommunications company, she had a twin sister who was sighted. They sent them off to summer camp. They were 10 years old, and the counselors would not let the blind girl ride the horses. They said, that's too dangerous. So these two 10-year-old girls snuck out of the cabin, got the horses in the night, and rode the horses. So, her memory is, galloping on these horses with her sister in the night, and just the sense of freedom it gave her. Another person who works for a very large technology company who everyone uses. He grew up in one of the boroughs in New York, and in his neighborhood, the 12 and 13-year-old boys kind of had this bicycle gang where they started doing bicycle tricks, like standing on the handlebars and things like that. So he did that. Another woman who was blind and kind of trying to fight it and hide it and wasn't using a cane, she fell down a flight of stairs and got very injured, and was sent to kind of a rehab center and a blind center, and they took her snow skiing. So she learned how to snow ski, and still fabulous skier, and that was her sense of freedom and liberation. So something experiential that gave that person the confidence to move through space with a body that can't see. It was really, really important.
Would you say, and I know that you have a background in philosophy also, would you say that those experiences are necessary for everyone, regardless of their ability level, to develop into kind of self-reliant individuals?
Yeah, I think okay, so we're getting into some stuff here. So the prevailing model and view paradigm of disability in our society is the medical model, where if you have an impairment, so my impairment is my retina's are detached, I can't see. So that's an impairment. And the medical model is we'll use medical science to do the best we can to fix that, to remedy that impairment. And if we can't, then we're done with you, and you have less capability than a person without an impairment. You're a broken person, therefore you inherently can't contribute to society at the level of a person without an impairment can do. Now, the model that's more useful and rational is a social construction that says disabling conditions are created when a person with an impairment tries to engage within an environment that isn't built correctly, either a social environment, a built-in physical environment, a digital environment. So the very simple example I like to use is, because I've been a CEO of fairly large organizations, I've run lots of meetings. If I have my agenda in Braille, I have my financials in Braille, I am not in a disabling condition. Although I have an impairment, I can't see, I'm able to function at the exact same level as anyone else, so I'm not in a disabling condition. Now, if you give me a stack of print, you give me a print agenda and print financials, my impairment of not being able to see has placed me in a disabling condition. And that's because you've put me in a situation where I have to interact with a built environment that wasn't constructed for my use. So I can't read the print, I can't run the meeting, so you've put me in a disabling situation. So that's the more useful model as we think about how we build our environments socially, culturally, physically, digitally. So that leads to a lot of thoughts about diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility in a larger context. So I like to think about, there's people sitting around a bonfire in a very cold night, and there's some people around the circle, and then there's some people out of the circle in the cold. And how do we build that fire large enough and that circle big enough to bring everyone in? How do we make everyone feel comfortable about joining the circle, feel that they belong there? So those are some of the things I spend my time thinking about.
Yeah. Well, and I've been fortunate enough to tour Lighthouse here in Seattle, and my first time was astonished. Frankly, I knew what was being done, and I knew that the work was being performed by individuals with varying levels of sight.
Yeah.
But seeing it firsthand and seeing the adaptive technologies and the systems, I don't really think there's a replacement for getting that tour.
I even though I don't work there anymore, I'll invite you to invite yourself to contact them and say you want to come in for a tour. So, a couple of highlights. So 120 blind and deaf-blind machinists, all running sophisticated computer numerically controlled machining equipment that's been adapted for people who are blind, machining titanium and aluminum, making parts for all the Boeing commercial aircraft, Northrop Grumman Global Hawk, Boeing Defense, making all of the entrenchment tools for the United States Army, all of the on-the-move hydration for the Army. It's a thriving social enterprise, employing blind and deaf-blind people in businesses that generate revenue, and the net income's reinvested into growing the businesses to hire more people. So it's a beautiful thing.
Kirk, thank you so much for answering all of my questions. I am continually blown away every time I talk to you with the stats and the facts that you bring and the work that you've been doing. So thank you. Absolutely.
And I know I took the liberty of encouraging people to visit the Lighthouse for the Blind in Rainier Valley in Seattle, although I no longer work there. But it's www.lhblind.org. And then feel free to reach out to me. It's kirkadams000@gmail.com, and I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can find me there.